Hello, and welcome to the Civil Service World podcast. I'm Suzannah Brecknell, Editor-in-Chief of Civil Service World, and in this episode, I'm in conversation with Sherin Aminossehe, Director for Growth and Missions at the Ministry of Defence. Sherin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're very welcome. We're already friends of Civil Service World, as you've been a 2-time cover star in our magazine, once without even knowing it during lockdown. So thank you for your support over the years.
I feel very chuffed being a cover girl. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, your job title is obviously exciting and interesting enough, at least to civil service aficionados like me, and I assume most of our listeners. But we did ponder whether to call this episode The Secret Life of a Civil Servant, because we will briefly discuss your career in and out of government. But we're going to be talking mostly about your work as a published artist and your new book, which is out later this month, which celebrates 200 years of Britain's railways. You will find, listeners, links in the episode notes to see Sherin's art and pre-order the book. But there is a connection between your two careers, because you started life as an architect, and drawing is obviously a core part of that training. So let's start with that training and work as an architect. Aside from the fact that you've said in the past PowerPoints in the civil service are less aesthetically pleasing than they were in the world of architecture, what are some of the main differences that you've observed over your career, which spans urban planning, architecture, and various roles in the civil service?
It's really interesting, because I think I must be one of the very few sort of civil servant architects around, which probably makes me a bit unique anyway. It's interesting. When I was about to leave the world of architecture, it never quite lets you go. But I remember a lot of people said to me, you'll miss the tracing paper, you'll miss the creativity, you'll miss being able to draw things. And I contemplated that, and I actually haven't missed it as much as I thought. I think there is a different way of thinking, PowerPoints aside. We use a lot less words and lots of just images, because images do speak 1,000 words. But there is a different way of thinking, which is probably, I don't want to say linear, because that's not fair to my fellow civil servants. But I suppose architects are just a little bit more out there. I would also say some architects are probably less rooted in the real world. I remember as an architect having conversations about finance, project management, and my fellow architects would just go, oh my God, don't you find that so boring? It's like, no, it's important, because otherwise the business would go bust.
Yeah. And you came to government and set up a lot of those sort of important things that have helped to move things along. So you joined setting up what is now the Government Property Agency.
Yes, I was the sponsor.
Yeah, and you also worked on the Government Hubs programme.
Yep.
You established the Property Fast Stream.
Yes.
Again, so sort of focusing on that, the nuts and bolts that some people might say it's boring, but it actually keeps the thing moving. Are you proud to see where those initiatives all are today?
It is. It's a little bit like a proud mum, because the Fast Stream, I started it off but didn't complete it. That was completed under Janet Young. And for me, that growth in career for younger people starting out on their journey is really, really important. And to be able to give people that opportunity, I think, is really critical. Hubs was very much about co-location of civil servants. It was linked to places for growth, but also why spend money that's hard to come by on offices that we didn't need when it could go into frontline services, which is really critical. And that was also linked to One Public Estate programme. So it's lovely the fact that they are continuing to this day under Mark Chivers and Mark Bourgeois. So it's really good to see.
Lovely. And I think we'll come back a little bit to your comment there about the civil service is perhaps more creative than people outside think it is, because John Manzoni, who you will have obviously worked with when you were first joining the civil service, he once referred to the civil service as the biggest sweet shop in the world in terms of all the interesting things you can do as an official. And I've heard you talk about defence infrastructure, which was your role before the one you're in now, as the biggest Lego set. You've described it as Lego with attitude. Lego is obviously a brilliantly creative toy. So when did you realise how satisfying and interesting it would be to kind of work with publicly owned property in this way?
I think the difference is the landscape is a lot bigger and therefore the opportunities to actually make a real change. I mean, initially when I started studying architecture, I did for a brief moment think that I wanted those beautiful shadow-gapped art galleries and, the houses with white sleek lines. And don't we all really? Well, maybe not, but I did. And then I started learning more. And actually for me, it was the impact that made a huge amount of difference. So if I bring it to my property career in the civil service and what I'm doing now, it is very much about the impact. It is the opportunity with assets that government has to make a real difference. And it's not something that I think people think about because they go, oh, grey offices, how exciting is that? But as I said, efficiency is there. means more money for frontline services, but also a better working environment means better policy making, a better environment to think about things, that creativity we were referring to. So it actually goes quite a lot broader than I think people think about of our beautiful lumps of grey concrete.
We've got a piece in our latest issue about the Treasury, a history of the Treasury buildings, and the author talks about the importance of buildings to the civil service where people work on diverse policies, they're dealing with change and different ministers. They aren't necessarily brought together by the jobs they do, but the places they work in gives us a common culture, a common way of relating to their jobs, basically. How do you kind of see the role of buildings and places where we work in terms of supporting us to do the work that we do for the civil service?
I mean, as an architect, it's so lovely to hear that. It is literally music to my ears. And I worked in the Treasury building when I was in the Cabinet Office. So actually, being in the Treasury building, because of its open floor plates as well as more cellular meeting rooms, just does give you the opportunity. I remember being able to just pop down a couple of flights of stairs and saying hello to Treasury colleagues, and that allowed a different way of working, which was really, really important. And I think people are very inspired by the environment that they work in. I remember I had a visit of the now slightly less new, but still very shiny Bloomberg building, which as you go, it's like a cathedral to workplace. And it is amazing with its swooping curves and the way it's detailed. Just the entrance going to a reception makes you feel as if what you are doing really matters. And I would say about the same about a lot of buildings, particularly the ones in Whitehall. They give you that sense of occasion and that you are here to do something that matters to the nation and makes a difference to the voters.
Yeah, people will often talk of the privilege of working in number 10, of
Absolutely.
walking up that road and through that door. So I know that you feel passionate, obviously, also about buildings in all their forms, always. Also about people in government taking more secondments, working between different sectors as you have. You are kind of a living example of what was briefly, I'm not sure if it still is, called the porosity agenda. Why do you think more people don't move in and out of government?
I think in some ways it's probably easier not to. You know, if you've got a set career path ahead of you, either in the private sector or the civil service, you know, doing those changes people could perceive affects your career chances, promotions and so on and so forth. And I suppose there is the fear of the unknown, isn't there? What is the public sector like? Or will I enjoy being the private sector? Is it a bit like selling my soul and that kind of thing? But to me, it's a wonderful opportunity, A, to grow, but also to learn what different parts of private and public sector are like. And without doing it, without actually experiencing it yourself, you can never know. So for me, I probably would like to think that I learned a lot of the technical stuff in my private sector career, but actually it was through the civil service rather that I learned about leadership in terms of complexity, change, scale. You don't really get that sort of scale in the private sector. But then going back to commerciality, I would say actually doing the time that I have done in the private sector has done this. So I would really encourage people, because secondments are out there. There's lots of private sector companies who are keen to have civil servants. And I think vice versa. And don't let that fear of not knowing what it is put you off, because actually the people are lovely on both sides. There's really exciting things to do. And there's a lot of opportunity.
A large part of your early career was in private sector. You came to government for a bit and then you returned to the private sector in 2018, but you came back to government quite quickly after that. What did you miss about the civil service?
I missed a lot of things. I mean, I'll say good things about my job in Lend-Lease. So they had some amazing projects. Stratford, which is obviously home of now some civil service organisations. There was Millennium Mills, which is still sort of contemplating development. It's an amazing building near the Thames. And of course, Euston Station. So the projects were really exciting. The people were great. But I really missed the complexity of the civil service that went just beyond building something, looking at the end balance sheet. Yes, you know, the workplace and the environment really mattered. For me, I think having been involved in the scale of Cabinet Office and the Government Property Unit, now OGP, I just really miss that. And I was surprised how much I missed it. Being able to think beyond the profit motive, what is happening in the wider policy agenda, and being able to shape that.
You're talking again about the complexity. It brings back to me the picture of a Lego set, you know, that kind of endless possibilities of things you can build. And also, I think it's shaping into your latest role, which obviously it's early days, so we're not going to discuss it that much, but you've described in a previous podcast, which I'll plug, Property She podcast, you've described it as being kind of, it's one of the more civil servicey roles you've done. It's moving more towards policy. It's bringing in that bigger picture, as you say, that kind of whole of society outcomes. And of course, you'll be working in the new role with public and private sector to drive growth and support the mission. There's a common perception, I think, that private sector is quick to get things done. It's the place to go to make things happen, and government is complex and slow. And has that always been your experience?
When I came to the public sector for the first time, I remember a number of my colleagues said, "You'll absolutely hate it. It will be so slow." And it's interesting. I would say Cabinet Office was probably anything but slow. And I think it depends what you're doing, who you're doing it with. But also, I worked in 2 private sector companies, which were essentially the mothership, as I would call it, was in another country. So in HOK, where I did my last architecture role, the mothership was in St. Louis in America, and Lend-Lease was effectively Sydney, Australia. And with those kinds of organisations, at least in my experience, for decisions to be taken, they usually almost have to go back to the head office in another country with another board, another discussion. And actually, I was finding, compared to especially like the civil service, decisions for relatively small amounts of money could take weeks. Yeah. And that's good because you needed the assurance. But it's not as if things can happen overnight.
Yes, it's not black and white, one's quick, one's fast. So you are also the MOD's race champion, and you've been at that role for a number of years. Why is that role important to you?
It's a number of things. So I arrived here at the age of 6, not speaking very much English. And I think I've said before, it's literally 3 words, which was yes, no, and thank you. And I've grown up in the UK. I consider myself very much British. But I've also seen how people can be treated who are not perceived by some to be exactly of the place. I remember when I got my GCSE results, I was in a queue in Sainsbury's. We were buying something to celebrate that evening with my dad. And there was a person ahead of us in the queue who thought I had queue jumped, which I hadn't, and then called me a Paki. I mean, beyond the fact that ethnicity and geographically was incorrect, so, he was clearly wrong. Why would you do that? It just really inappropriate. For me, and I know I've experienced much less than some others have, but I've also saw how my parents were treated in their careers. It's really important that everybody gets the same opportunity and that place of work should be safe. You can not just be your whole self, but also your aspirations should be allowed for. Your cultural background, what you bring in should very much be part of the conversation. And that, I feel, is what my role is, to facilitate and to be there if people need a listening ear. But to me, that equality is really, really critical.
And I think you've also spoken on the Property She podcast about the fact that you ended up in England because discrimination in the Canadian visa system, that your parents weren't given a visa to go there because of their professions. That
it was really random because all the paperwork was done effectively. We had come here because I think it was just literally the medical. So it was kind of a rubber stamp job. And the guy at the Canadian High Commission, I suspect, effectively said to my mum, "Oh, well, my brother is an out-of-work architect. Why should I let you into the country to take a job that could be his?"
It's shocking.
It is.
Yeah.
But, great. I ended up in this small island with great weather, she says, looking at the dark clouds outside.
UK civil service is grateful for the discrimination of that that Canadian embassy official many years ago. And also, I think, it's great that, again, you've also spoken about, as you are aware that as you become more senior in your career, the discrimination you face is less, you're going to face less of it because people are not going to be rude to a senior leader. But actually, it's really important we still play a role in supporting people in the starts of their careers and other points in their careers not to experience the same discrimination.
Absolutely. If anything, as you get more senior, I would say you have a greater responsibility to be that role model, to stand up for people and so on. Your role with seniority actually becomes, more onerous in that sense rather than less, just because you've left it behind or you don't experience it shouldn't be something that you forget about.
And I know you are a big supporter of our sister company, Women into Leadership, or sister series of events, which we'll come back to as we move into your secret life. I confess to being a big fan of your drawings, which I think of as they're intricate, but they're not fussy. It's the line drawings, the ink drawing that kind of I remember, but then there's these sort of splashes of colour that bring the life and the atmosphere to the places you draw. So tell us how you began drawing? What was your kind of first experiences of enjoying drawing?
And my mum was an amazing artist, and she effectively taught me. So I've basically said that I literally, as soon as I could hold a pencil, I can draw. And my mother was lovely in the sense that I still have albums of my work going back to when I was about 1.5. I don't think your listeners would want to particularly me to share that kind of art with them. But probably one of the earliest memories I have was literally before we left Iran. So I was 5 and a bit, so literally just before I became 6 years old. And my father took me to the roof of the apartment, which actually my parents had designed. My father was the engineer for, my mother was the architect. Went to the roof. We were in northern Tehran, so you could see the Alborz mountain range, and the sun was setting. And my father showed me that picture and said, you might want to draw this. And I remember with my mum sort of talking about it. And then I drew the picture that evening. And of course, the reason you don't really think about it when at such a young age was because they knew that we were about to leave in the next few months. And I'd never see that again. And of course, I haven't. And I've got that drawing and I actually put it on my X account. I still want to call it Twitter, is that bad? On my X account. And that's probably the first very much sort of shaping moment of the importance, and of course I didn't think about it this way as a child, but sort of reflecting the importance of art representing place and places that you can't be at. And that's how, I suppose, shaped my lockdown experience when I started what I thought was going to be probably a really short-lived event that ended up going on for over a year of daily posts.
Yeah, that first memory is a brilliant link into the events that happened in the COVID pandemic that changed this from kind of a private hobby into something much wider. So tell us, what was the post that you put up on Twitter as it was, and what happened after you put up that post?
So I was thinking, amongst homeschooling, obviously work, not being able to see somebody, I thought, well, I really need something to do that was different from everything else. So I posted a drawing and then I did a second one on the day. I said, if people want me to draw a place that they really miss, please let me know. And I honestly expected it to be no more than maybe 3-4 people if I was lucky. And a week later, my initiative would probably die out into, the social media black hole. And there it was, sort of within 24 hours, I had 30 requests and growing, which I really couldn't believe. And I had a lovely friend who I'd met through my work at Terry Farrell's who was encouraging me in this. And she suggested, actually, you need to turn this into something a little bit more serious. So I started it was literally first come, first serve. And some of the really amazing things that came up. So a colleague who actually we'd never met, but is now an ex-civil servant. He is Australian, and for him, the railway station in Melbourne was really special because that's where he would always meet his friends. It was a really special meeting place for me. So I drew that for him, never having been there. So I would go to people, well, I'm not going to go there, am I? It's impossible. Some people did think that I must have travelled during lockdown, which was fascinating. So give me a photograph where you want me to draw, what is special, and I'll do my own take on it. But it was from there to somewhere in Mexico. We had places in Peru, lots of places in the States, obviously lots of UK, a lot of holiday destinations, which people were missing because by that time it was April, it was getting close to the summer break. People weren't necessarily going to be able to go. And then the other one that really touched me was of a church tower in Lebanon. And the family of this lady almost had an annual pilgrimage there. Her great-grandfather had designed it. And it was a meeting place for the whole family of all generations, and they couldn't go. So there is literally that drawing of a church tower, somewhere I don't think I will ever see.
Yeah.
But for her, it was really, really special. And they got everyone to write for the book that came out of it afterwards, which was for Safa, 100 words of why that place was special to them. And some of it was some of it was just normal holidays. I missed my holidays well, but incredibly poignant as linked towards who they were, what their family was, people they'll never see again.
Yeah.
So, I was really privileged to be able to do that.
It was a really resonant. I mean, I sent a copy of it actually to family who were living abroad and we hadn't obviously seen them for much longer than we would normally have not been able to see them. And I sent them a copy of this book because it really was the stories in it. And it was such a lovely kind of
Thank you.
Universal, it touched that sense of all of us being unable to get to where we wanted to be. You mentioned SAFA, just pick that out for the listeners who don't
Yes,
know that
sorry.
charity. Tell us about where we can still buy some of your work and
So
also support them.
SAFA is the Armed Forces charity, so it's not particularly just about serving personnel, but it also supports their families, it supports them after they've served as well. So it's got a really, really broad remit and does lots of amazing things. The book, all the proceeds go for SAFA on their website still. There's also, I've done prints for them, and I've now in my 5th year, I think, of an annual calendar for them as well. And this year's theme is actually military museums for those listeners who are keen on that sort of thing.
So I'm interested, you mentioned that people would send you a photograph. Did you do other research around the places that you were drawing? Because you drew such brilliant images that people thought you'd actually been there.
It was a variety of things. I mean, Google and Google Earth are wonderful things, as is Google Street View. So that was helpful. And then, of course, sometimes pictures that people would email across are variable. So quite often I would only have a name of a place that I would then do a bit of research on and then draw. And actually, there was only one drawing that I felt uncomfortable about doing because the site was a very, very holy religious site. And I won't go into details. But I just felt actually the whole point is not about representation of that site. So I said, please choose somewhere else. Otherwise, if it looks bad, I feel it's disrespectful.
Sure. So let's move on to your latest project. You've got this coming out in...
It's a tome.
It's a proper coffee table book. We've got a copy of it here with us. 200 Years of Britain's Railways in 14 Journeys. And it's out at the end of September, is that correct?
Yeah, 25th of September.
25th of September. How did that book come about? I understand that women in leadership played a part in it, but it nearly didn't happen because you have a strong nose for spam.
Yes, it was really quite random. So in lockdown, I think it was April 21, I did the Women in Leadership conference online. And a few months afterwards, I had an email from an American lady who was based in Bristol, said that she was a literary agent and her husband, who works for the ONS, believe it or not, had been at the talk, had a recording of my talk and had sent it to her because he was really interested. What are the chances, hey? And because of exactly that, because obviously I work in MOD, I sort of thought, that's not real. There's no way that's real. So I thought it was spam. I thought it was one of these phishing things. The moment you contact them, they'll get your details and your whole bank account will be cleared out. But Kate, my agent, actually is an amazing, wonderful, patient, clearly human being, because a month later, and clearly tenacious, emailed me, said, did you get my email? And I thought, this person's just not going away. So I contacted through Scala, the people who published my previous book, like, is she for real? And embarrassingly, she was for real. I'm still embarrassed to this day that I thought she was a scammer. And she very kindly, sort of after a few months of conversation, said, at first she thought there was a book in the conversation, in the women leadership. I did the A to Z of women leadership. And we had lots of lovely feedback from publishers, but it was just not to be. And she said, well, what else are you really passionate about? Infrastructure, of course. I love bricks. I love concrete. And I'd been speaking to Bernadette, the then PermSec of Department for Transport. She was telling me about the 200-year celebrations. I thought, well, how great. Because there's lots of books about railway stations, but not illustrated and doesn't include all the other aspects of railway infrastructure that we kind of take for granted. So that's how this book was born. And my agent got me a publisher, so the lovely Frances Lincoln, who also do the Little People, Big Dreams collection, which I think probably all parents know about. It's been quite a labour of love, but I've loved doing it.
So as I said, we've got a copy here, but I've not actually had time to leaf through it. So tell us what's in the book. What does it take us through?
So essentially, 27th of September this year is the 200th anniversary of the very, very first railway journey that went from Darlington to Stockton. And this was effectively how the railways was revolutionised, because it was the first time passengers and goods were taken through in 1825. And it changed the face of travel forever. So it's a celebration of that in 14 journeys, starting with the very, very first journey back 200 years ago and going through the railways it passed through, the stations that are no more. Some of them, like Hayington, are being restored now in time for the 200 celebrations, all the way through different parts of the country. And Yeah, it's a bit subjective because I've taken the stations that I particularly like or I think are quite meaningful or have stories attached to them. And then ending with what I think is going to be the aspects that you need in a really good station and what that means. I suppose quite pertinent to the fact that obviously HS2 is currently being constructed and Euston's going to be different.
And there's a lovely link as well back to your first job in the civil service with Darlington is obviously, you know, a flagship part of Places
Indeed.
for Growth and hubs now. What's your favourite railway station?
I've got two random ones and I'll do two more traditional ones. I actually quite love Euston Station, which I know is a controversial choice. But because I went to UCL and studied architecture there, the smells, the sound, the space, even the really bad wind tunnel effects because it was badly laid out buildings of my A0 portfolio just flapping in the wind is really sort of part of who I am. But the terrazzo floor, the old indicator board, the analog one, which told you. So that to me will always be really, really special, but I know it's controversial.
Well, I can feel that. So I have a special connection to St Pancras, which I used to go to university before it was all revamped, when it was its horrible old
the really
self.
grimy time.
Exactly. And so even the other week when I was there having a lovely champagne in the CSE's bar, I thought, you know, I do still miss the old grimy St Pancras where I used to set off to university and the kind of horrible sandwich place that sold. So I can understand that kind of nostalgia for before it became grand.
Thank
Euston
you.
is yet to become grand, obviously,
Thank
but
you.
still, yeah.
I'm glad you didn't judge me for it because the other one you might judge me for. Coventry Station, I was on Director's Leadership Programme and one of our modules was set there. So I spent quite a bit of time waiting for late trains on a very cold platform. But, you know, the fonts that they use, the quality of hardwood in the handrails, the tiles that they imported from Switzerland are all incredible. And I think most people would think I am completely nuts. But it is really, really special. But the more traditional ones, I love the revamped King's Cross. I mean, who wouldn't love those gorgeous McCaslin curves? And I've drawn that for the book. And then Bristol Temple Meads I loved. And of course, going to the very first hub, which was in Bristol, I had plenty of opportunity to enjoy the sort of neo-Gothic Tudor-Beathan kind of architecture. It is a wonderful space.
Is Tudor-Beathan a real architectural term? Is it a real...
It is if you read Osbert Lancaster, yeah.
Okay, right. Now, you've obviously, the book contains 14 journeys in Britain. What is your dream railway journey, either one you have been on or one you would love to go on?
So I was very lucky that as part of a honeymoon, my husband took me on the Orient Express. And that was an incredibly special experience, down to actually the design of the carriages and actually the journey itself, which was beautiful. At some point, I would like to do the longer journey all the way to Istanbul. That would be a really, really special experience. But I've been fortunate. I've done lots of railway journeys. So across China, I've done the Rocky Mountaineer in Canada. I've been across the States, done a lot of Swiss mountain journeys, which is special. But I would love to do that west to east one at some point.
I feel like we're in danger of diverting into a railway podcast
Sorry.
here. No, it's great. I love it. You said that you draw more now than you ever did, even as an architect. When do you sleep?
Sleep is optional. No, joking. I have quite a sort of disciplined way of how I do my drawings because otherwise it just wouldn't happen. So first thing in the morning when I'm drawing, I will sort of set out what I'm going to draw, maybe just have all my materials ready and start sort of doing either a pen sketch or a pencil sketch of it, depending on what I want to do. And then once that's sorted, then if I'm working from home, I'll usually have about half an hour to an hour from lunch. If it's not a particularly busy day, then I can develop that over my lunch break. At least that's what I did over lockdown. And then realistically know now what happens is the lunch break doesn't really happen. So I will then pick up a pen in the evening and work in front of the TV really until it gets done. It's a slightly slower process. You know, the average drawing will take about a day or two to get done.
Would you think you'll ever put down the kind of bureaucrat's laptop and take up only the artist pens? Or are the two parts of your life so complementary that you kind of feel they're both necessary at the moment?
They are inextricably linked. There is also the thing that obviously being an author and illustrator doesn't really pay. But I love both the things I do. To actually have to put one down and favour another would be really, really difficult. It would be amazing though if this book does reasonably okay and there might be something else in the offing. That would be a real pleasure to do. But, time will tell, really.
Certainly hope that there will be more projects like this in the offing. And I hope also we will be able to speak to you in due course about your role and the many more interesting things I'm sure you will do across the civil service. Thank you again for giving us your time today. As I said before, do check the episode notes for links to order the new book and to see the old book and the other work that Sherin does for SAFA. Thank you for joining us, listeners. Please do remember to subscribe to the Civil Service World podcast so that you will get all the next episodes for your civil service aficionado needs straight into your podcast feed. Thank you.